Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Tuesday info session. Today we have Atlantic Grains Council with us. So Misty Coron is going to do the presentation, and Misty is Vice President and partner with LP Consulting, which is an agricultural consulting company that has taken on several roles with Atlantic Grains Council. In particular, Misty leads LP's Consulting's work on the on-farm agronomy trials in PEI, Nova Scotia, and Eastern New Brunswick, so she's busy running the roads. Misty also is the Atlantic Grains Council data manager, so she manages compiling all the data from the trials and works with the AAFC to analyze and interpret it. She herself was raised on a cow-calf operation and has worked in agriculture her entire life. She works in Atlantic Canada as well as in Ontario and Alberta. So thank you for joining us, Misty. We also at the end are going to have Alan Miller. He's going to wrap up the presentation, and he works with research coordination with the Atlantic Grains Council. There's a couple of sections, this, as you can see on this slide, the soybean seeding rate, and then talking about barley. So we'll hold questions on each section. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions kind of between the sections. So I'll be monitoring the chat section, or you can feel free to come off mute and just ask your question out loud. There'll also be a few door prizes. Andrew's gonna draw for a few door prizes at the end. So if no one has anything to we'll ask Misty to get started. Go on mute here.
Okay, thanks everybody. You can hear me all right, I hope. Thanks for the introduction, Mariella. And yeah, so today we're going to talk about the soybean seeding rate trial that's been going on since 2015, and the barley nitrogen timing trial that's from 2019 and 2020. And hopefully this is going to move forward. Okay, this seems to have frozen up, so just give me 2 seconds and I'll see if I can't share that screen again. And hopefully this will go through. You guys, oh, there we go. Perfect. So we're going to cover the introduction today, just talking about what the seeding rate trial is, seeding accuracy, plant population, yield, rotation, and conclusions, and what's next. So first off, the soybean seeding rate trial, we've got over 40 sites across the Maritimes from 2015 to 2020. Each of those sites is actually a representative or a replicate of the trial. So when we look at the data, we actually look at the data from the Maritimes as a whole, because each one is a replicate. So if we only look at the results from one province, we're only looking at a small slice of the data itself. So we don't want to separate out the replicate sites. So we look at it as a whole. And the exciting part about the data I'm going to share with you today is we've got the statistical analysis completed. And so that really continues on to what I showed you guys last year with this. The variables in the trial were germination, variety, fertilizers, and soil fertility. And the treatments that we had were 90,000 seeds per acre, 110, 130, 160, and 190. And that's from 2015 to 2020. So in the early stages of this trial, we had the 130, 160, and 190,000 seeds per acre. And based on that data, we were showing no difference in yield. So then we decided to look at the lower seeding rates to see how low we could go before we started to see an impact on yield. And that's when we added in the 130, 110, and 90. So seeding accuracy, I spoke to this last year, and I think it's really important to go over again. I looked at the seeding accuracy based on the raw data, and I took the results of each of the treatment and divided them into 3 groups, just to give an idea of what % of the plots actually fell within our target population that we're looking for. So the 3 groups are within 20% of, or 80 to 120% of the target population. Then the second group was less than 80% of the target population, and the third group was over 120% of the target population. And the reason I wanted to look at this was to see how well we were actually hitting our target. And what we found is that overseeding is a problem, especially at the lower and higher seeding rates. So on this graph, you can see it goes along the bottom, your 90, 110, 130, 160, 190 seeding rates. And the orange section is the percent that was actually within target. So on the 90,000 seeding rate, we actually were above target 46% of the time. At the 110 and 160, we were doing a really good job, and we were within our target over 50% of the time. At the upper end, at 190,000 seeds per acre, we are above target 38% of the time. So this really shows that we need to do a good job on calibrating our equipment, because overseeding can cost us money. So if we look at the seeding accuracy economics, how much does missing the target actually cost us? In this table, I show the target seed cost per acre. So this is what you would budget. If I'm planning on seeding 90,000 seeds per acre, I'm budgeting $51 an acre in my seed costs. For 190,000 seeds per acre, it's $109 is what I'm budgeting for my seed costs. If we look at the percent we're over target, we were over target from $22 to $115 an acre. That means that we spent double the money per acre than we budgeted for. And that's happening 38% of the time. So we're spending a lot more money on seeds than one, we think we are, and two, than we should. So calibration, I can't stress enough how important calibration is. Many farmers calibrate, but they only do it once. So we need to recalibrate for different variety seed sizes. If your seeding rate goal is 160,000 seeds per acre, and you have a seed size that equates to 5,000 seeds per kg, you calibrate your seeder for 70 pounds per acre. So you plant variety 1 at 70 pounds per acre, and then you go and you switch to a different variety. Except this variety, your seed size is 5710 seeds per kg. Well, if you keep that same 70 pounds per acre, you're actually planting 180,000 seeds per acre. So we're overplanting. And it's these simple things, that the different of seed sizes, that can really affect our actual seeds going into the ground. So we have to pay attention to that. For plant population of this trial, and this is again looking at the statistical data, the stats show that there is a significant difference in plant population within this trial, which is perfect. It's supposed to be. I've put on these graphs 2 little black bars. That is to illustrate where there's a significant difference. So if you have different columns that are inside or outside those 2 black bars, you know that there is a statistical difference there. So that's to illustrate that. So we can see that from 90,000 to 190,000, we increase in our plant population, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. But the big question, of course, is does the increase in yield, or does the increase in plant population result in an increase in yield?
Kyle sent me another.
So then when we look at the actual yields, we can see that there is no statistical difference in yields based on our seeding rate. And this is looking at the data from 2015 to 2020. Increasing the seeding rate does not increase the yields. But this is only one view of this data. And this is why looking at the stats is so exciting. Because this is just based on treatment. So if we look at the yields simply based on treatment, there is no statistical difference. I showed everybody this last year, and it was looking at the yield economics to try to figure out what the ideal seeding rate is. And when I was looking at the raw data for this table, I looked at the average yields, the minimum and the maximum yields, and I came to the conclusion that the optimum seeding rate is between 130 and 160,000 seeds per acre, based on reducing your risk of a low yield, yield potential for high yield, and the average yield returns. I have net in red there because all I did for this net profit calculation was I took the cost of the seed and I subtracted that from the value of the soybeans per ton. The assumptions there is a bag of seed costs $85 and the value of soybeans is $500 a ton. And right now that's actually kind of modest because the price of beans are doing fabulous. So when we look at yield economics from the statistical data, and this is including the 2020 numbers, what is the ideal seeding rate? When we look at this graph, we see that the 160,000 seeds per acre is our ideal seeding rate, but the stats also told us that just based on treatment alone, there's no statistical difference. So considering yield based only on treatment isn't the whole picture. We need to look at what does cause a significant difference in yield. Because when we look at this, we could say, well, the 90 and 110 are actually pretty good too. And if there's no statistical difference in yield, why not save money on seed cost? So then we look at rotation. The seeding rate does not influence yield, but the rotation does. That is a conclusion that was drawn from the statistical analysis. So we looked a little more closely at the rotation and the impact that it has on the yields. And we developed 5 different rotations. And this is looking at the past 3 years. So when I talk about a corn rotation, a grain rotation, soybean, and potato, this is what I mean. So for a corn rotation, it means that corn was grown in at least one of the previous 3 years, but there's been no potatoes. For a grain rotation, it means that grain was grown in at least one of the previous 3 years, but there's been no corn, no soybeans, and no potatoes. For a soybean rotation, it means that soybeans was grown in at least one of the 3 previous years, but no potato, no corn. Potatoes means that there was potato somewhere in the last 3 years. And for forage rotation, it means it was forages all 3 years. So that means that we were taking it straight out of a grass forage rotation and planting beans in there. So when we look at yields by rotation, there is a statistical difference in yield based on that rotation. But this isn't the entire story either, because again, we're just looking at yields based on one factor, which is the rotation. What the stats really showed, which is the most exciting part, is that there's an interaction between the seeding rate and the rotation. So we need to look at it even in a more complex scenario, which is why I love these stats. And this is what it brings out. So these are the yields by rotation and by treatment. So I know there's a lot going on in this graph, but just bear with me. So what we have here is the columns that are dark blue. That's your 90,000 seeds per acre. Yellow is 110, green is 130, red is 160, and the light blue is 190,000 seeds per acre. Then it's divided up by your corn rotation, your forage rotation, your grain rotation, your potato rotation, and your soybeans. So for corn rotation, there is no significant difference in yields, so we might as well save our money there. But for forage, you can see that there is, and we're starting to see a significant difference once we get up to 160,000 seeds per acre. For grain, 160,000 seeds per acre also is our optimum yields. And for soybeans, we can see that 160,000, which was deemed our ideal seeding rate, is also the optimum yield. This is where we really see the ideal seeding rate, where it falls outside of the ideal 160 based on that rotation effect. So for our potatoes, we're actually going to want to seed at 90,000 seeds per acre. And for corn, since there's no significant difference in yield, we can save money on seeds and plant at 90,000 seeds per acre. So the 160,000 seeds per acre as our optimum based on the stats, you can see how that's affected just by that treatment number. But when we really look at the interaction between the rotation and the seeding rate, we can customize our seeding rate to take advantage of the lower seeding rates and get a higher yield. So when we look at yield economics and we couple that yield economics with our rotation, we can take our corn at the optimum 90,000 seeding rate, and now our net dollars per acre is 487. For our forages, grains, and soybeans, the 160,000 was shown as our ideal seeding rate, and we can see our net dollars per acre, 533, 523, 389. For the potato, we can drop our seeding rate to 90,000 seeds per acre and have a potential net of 565. So if we compare that to the economics just based on treatment alone, which is just the seeding rate alone, there is a huge potential for us to make higher net profit if we customize our seeding rate based on our rotation. And this is probably the most exciting part that I found, is that we don't have to just set the seeder at one thing. We can customize how we seed our fields based on our rotation to really maximize our net profit. So for the conclusion, last year, I told you that we needed to calibrate because we're losing money over seeding. That's still true. We need to increase seeding rates. The increasing seeding rates do not increase yield. The stats still show that. Rotation impacts the yield a lot more than the seeding rate does, but that's only one part of the story. The optimum seeding rate between 130 and 160,000 based on economics, risk, and yield, that's still true, but there's more to the story. So what's new? Based on this statistical analysis, we've seen that there is an interaction between the seeding rate and the rotation. We can maximize profits by customizing seeding rates based on the field rotation. And spring calibration should be done for different varieties and for the optimum seeding rate based on rotation. And I've had comments that say, you mean to tell me you want me to calibrate for not just a different variety, but also different seeding rates? My answer is yes. Take an hour in the spring when you're gearing up all of your equipment and you're greasing everything, you're getting it ready to get really familiar with your planter and your seeder, do your calibration. You're probably looking at 2 seeding rates, 160 or 90, and you can select that for the varieties that you're using. The hour of time is going to save you a lot of money and really maximize your profit. If you need help with your seeding calibration, you can actually go to Atlantic Grains Council's website, and they have an awesome video on there that takes you right through how to calibrate. So what's next? If rotation affects yield, can we help reduce the rotation effect? And can we do that through seedbed preparation or through rolling? Or maybe we want to look at a combination of the two, roll once, roll twice. So stay tuned for a new trial on that. And is there a different impact by previous crop than by type of rotation? And that's something that I'm really curious to look at too. So we've asked to have the stats analysis done for the previous crop to see if previous crop maybe shows us a different picture than just looking at the rotation does. So is there any other questions on that? I'd like to hear any ideas you have as well. If there's something else that you want us to look at that we didn't touch on.
Did you look at nutrient? Like, is the rotation driver, for the potato, for example, being traditionally a fairly nutrient dense rotation?
Yeah.
Like, is it nutrient levels? Is it base nutrient levels?
Yeah. So when we look at the field background nutrient levels, that's counted as one of the variables. So it's taken into account when the stats are done. We do have the statistical analysis on those because we do take a soil sample at harvest to see what's been put on. But the background soil levels is a variable within the trial, and the fertility applied to the soybeans is a variable within the trial.
Kevin Curry is asking in the questions would be, again, on the nutrient level, the K levels as a variable, and is there an impact? Yeah.
So far the answer to that is the rotation is creating more of an interaction than the nutrients are. Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions or comments about the soybean seeding rate?
Were these
If you
all,
think of any, we'll have a chance later too, so.
were they all 15-inch rows? Sorry.
Nope, there was different rows. The majority of them were 15-inch rows. Some of them were 7.5.
Any differences in 7.5 versus 15? Is that, no?
Nope. The large majority were 15.
We have a question in the chats. Any use of manure? What about the use of manure?
In rotation, there would be in some cases. I don't believe there was any manure applied the year of. Again, that goes into the variables with the fertility applied.
Mm-hmm. Robert's asking any difference in solid seeded acres. So meaning
Solid.
as in like a 6 or a 7.5 inch row, Robert?
Yes, a 5 to a 10 or a 15.
The majority were 12 to 15-inch rows. We did have a few that were 7.5, so it depends on if they plugged every other two. But no, we never. That certainly didn't come out as a significant variable.
Is there any thought to having a look at that at some point in time?
I can put it on my list for you, Robert, for sure.
Yeah, it seems to be a trend in other areas. It's short, like tightening up rows.
The biggest effect that I've seen on tightened rows is if you're in an area that has higher disease pressure, you'll see a lot more white mold. Where we saw the narrow rows were actually primarily in eastern New Brunswick, because they don't have disease pressure there. In Nova Scotia, we were all 15-inch rows because of white mold issues. But it didn't come out as a significant variable, but I will make sure of that and look at that again to see if we can tease any more information out of that for you, Robert.
Yeah, I just been looking at the last couple of years. I tried it last year, but they got into the plot before I got a chance to figure it out.
Yeah.
If your goal is 160,000 seeds per acre, and what's the difference whether they're solid seeded at 160 or at 7.5 or 10 or 15 inches? What's the difference?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like the idea of the twin row planters.
Yeah.
Soybeans planted that way too. It's just how much daylight did it have to capture?
And I guess part of where my thought process was, anybody that grows or non-GMO soys for the tofu market, weed control can be an issue every year. And
yeah.
if you can get the field filled in quicker, then maybe you can get through a dry spell and the weeds will be suppressed by a thick growth of soybeans. That's where I'm coming from on that.
Yeah, so you'd really like it if I could tell you that your narrower row width is going to equate to an equal yield, certainly no detriment, and potentially higher if you can get that weed control covered.
Yes, and I know it's been already proven you do get yield by using at least one fungicide. So in that scenario, it doesn't matter whether it's a 5-inch or 15-inch row. I'm going to use fungicide anyways. So
yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like seeding rate, you listen to a lot of the talk in Ontario, and seeding rate seems to be very impactful on disease management, more so than row width.
Yeah.
So.
We do take disease parameters when we are in season. We do look at disease, but we haven't actually done the stats on the disease to see if there's enough reported disease to even do stats on them. For the most part, when we see disease within that season, it's quite localized. So say we have 15 replicates in one season. You might have disease in one area, and then all the other treatments are clean. So then that year, you're looking at the stats for 1 year's data, you have one disease incident. So you can't really say one way or another. So you almost have to have a universally bad year for disease to really see if it's impactful. It's hard to get enough data on that.
Yeah, and with it being Atlantic Canadian, it's just, you can have such isolated disease incidents based on weather, and yeah.
Yeah, and like Eastern New Brunswick, they're right next to the strait, and they get lots of breeze, and they don't typically have disease there like you do in kind of central Nova Scotia, or if there's such thing as central PEI. You guys are all surrounded by water.
Yeah, there's not much in the middle. Alan is asking, is it possible that high levels of cultivation are playing a role in the potato and corn rotations?
I would dare say so. I was actually quite surprised that there was no significant difference in seeding rate in a rotation, because I thought that the corn should have a bit more impact. That's, I think it would be really interesting. I'm really interested to look at previous crop to see if we have a previous crop of grain corn, and with or without incorporation of that corn trash, are we seeing a difference that way? To see anything with no-till versus tillage, I think it would be really fun to look into that, to look into no-till versus tillage.
Was all this tillage based, or did you differentiate?
We didn't differentiate, no. So there was some that was no-till. A very, very small amount though. I'm thinking maybe 1 or 2 fields per year.
Yeah, pretty minimal.
Yeah.
Okay, well, oh, Robert has another question. Any thoughts about the effect of no extra N versus added N to help break down of corn stalks?
Well, we actually have another soybean trial that is nitrogen and sulfur. And one of the treatments in that trial is to have no nitrogen applied. And so then that would have the same crop rotation impacts in it that this trial would see, but that one's actually based on fertility. So that's a separate trial that we're looking at for the nitrogen effects. So then we can look at rotation to see if there's any corresponding interaction the same way.
Any foliar fertilizer used on these plots?
No.
On these trials?
Yeah.
And Kevin Curry's wondering if, since it's regional data, any concerns versus soil type here and soil type in the mainland?
So that's what's the
variable.
beauty about the variable, yeah. And that's what's really nice about the stats. So this project's been going on since 2015, and if the soil variability was a problem, it would come out. If it was a significant variable, it would come out in the statistical data. So when you do the stats on that and you actually take all of those variables into account, it really gives us a true idea of what's going on, because you've accounted for all those different variables: the soil type, sandiness versus clay, climatic changes that might happen in, PEI versus the valley, Nova Scotia versus northern New Brunswick. So all those variables are taken into account when they do the statistical analysis.
I think Alan's going to speak to this at the end, but he says there's new videos on the Atlantic Grains Council website that deals with row spacing and the impact on disease.
Fabulous.
Okay, let's move on to barley.
Okay. So the barley nitrogen trial. This trial is brand new. It's only 2 years old. And I thought we would talk about it today because it actually uses ESN in everything. And I know that my farmers have been asking a lot about that. And since you guys sell it, I thought you might be interested in it too. So we'll go through the introductions, the yields, protein, test weight, rotation, any early observations. There's no conclusions because this trial is just brand new, and kind of what's next. So the barley trial is looking at the application, timing, and source of nitrogen. So far, we've got 17 sites across the Maritimes from 2019 to 2020. So in 2 years, we've covered a lot of ground. And we do have the statistical analysis completed for the data from those 2 years. And what we did in this trial is we had all the treatments received 80 pounds per acre of nitrogen. And that 80 pounds per acre was chosen based on the results of a previous trial that we had, which looked at nitrogen applications from 30 pounds per acre to 90. And that's where we developed the 80 pounds per acre based on the results of that data. So what we did is we put a number of treatments in place. The first treatment is urea. So we had 80 pounds per acre all at planting. Then we took the urea and we split it. So we had 40 pounds per acre at planting, and then we had a top dress application at stem elongation of another 40 pounds per acre. We have a urea ESN mix. The mix contains 60% urea, 40% ESN, and it was all put down at planting. And then we have the non-leaching agrotane, and that was a coated urea, all at planting. And here are the yields. So currently, there's no statistical difference in yields, but the trial is young. So you can see there's quite a spread between our two little black lines showing our statistical difference. And as we get more results, the accuracy is going to improve. What's interesting is even though this is young and there's no statistical difference, we are seeing a positive increase with the agrotane and the non-leaching, the non-leaching agrotane and the ESN. So we did see a bit of a bump with those two products and with the split application over the urea. For protein, no statistical difference, but the current data shows that the protein is not affected by the timing of the nitrogen application. So this could actually be a bit of a positive for our consideration that we won't see a negative effect on protein if we apply split applications of nitrogen, use slow release nitrogen or non-leaching agrotane to get our nitrogen on within the 4R recommendations. So as this trial continues and we gather more data, it'll be interesting to see if that stays the same, because then we can kind of rest assured that it doesn't matter how we get our nitrogen on, our protein won't be affected as long as it's there. So for test weight, there's no statistical difference in test weight, but the results are different from what we saw in the protein and the yield, in that we see a bit of a decrease in the non-leaching agrotane. Right now, it's not significantly different, but as we gain more data, it will be interesting to see which of these fluctuations become more prominent, or if they're going to become the same and just remain unaffected. So as we gain more data, we're going to be able to distinguish any interactions. So for rotation, I did look at the rotation, and the stats show the rotation has an effect on yield, protein, and test weight, but it's not the same as what we saw in soybeans. There's no interaction between the rotation and the treatment. The rotation affects the yield of the barley, but it's not dependent upon when we put nitrogen on or what source we used. So more data is required to determine if there's an optimum timing or source based on rotation. So that would be really cool to find. So as we continue with this trial and we gather more information, we'll certainly be looking at that closely to see if we can, put together some best management practices and recommendations. So observations after 2 years, we saw a positive increase in yield with ESN and non-leaching agrotane, but currently it's not statistically different. The protein is not affected by nitrogen timing or source, and the test weight is not affected by nitrogen timing or source. The rotation affects yield, but there is no interaction between the rotation and treatment. And all of those things I could say yet. So it's 2 years old. As we gain more data, it will be interesting to see if any interactions happen or if something becomes more significant. So what's next? First thing is we need to collect more data, and more years will strengthen the data and the conclusions that we can bring. So is there any questions on the barley? I know that one was short and sweet, but right now we're just not seeing, a difference in the protein, but there is some positive trends for the use of ESN and non-leaching agrotine.
We have a question in the chat. Is there more variability in the results at higher yield levels?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. Higher variability, I'm writing this down here. Higher availability between the treatments at higher yields? Is that the question?
Yeah, exactly, at higher yield levels.
Look at that.
See, the treatments again were urea all up front.
Yep.
Urea split. So your second treatment is urea up front and then urea top dressed on.
Yep.
And was that top dress treated or was it just straight urea?
Just straight urea. Yeah.
Okay.
Prior to stem elongation.
So there, as far as urea with regular agrotane, just for this, the agrotane you're using is an agrotane with a DCD in it for non-leaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was an important thing to point out to the farmers too, because they're used to using the regular agrotane, but this was the specific non-leaching agrotane. So it was kind of harder to get, but it was interesting to see. We just wanted to see about the leaching primarily in the spring.
Anyone else with questions on or comments on the barley?
For the different treatments, the nitrogen sources or whatever, Misty, did you do any like analysis of tissue to see if there was more nitrogen in the plant, or?
Yep, we did. We did. We didn't see a statistical difference in the nitrogen. It basically was all saying that it was within optimum. But we do, any of our fertility trials, we do take tissue samples. So we're going to continue to do that. And you never know what's going to show up. And the more often we do this, so we had the spring of 2019, which we all remember as horrible. And then we had the spring last year where I was out in fields on the island and it was already dusty in May. So we've had two very different springs. And as we collect more data, we're going to have more weather and more different springs to kind of compare that data to. And the stats will help pull out anything that's significant within that. So they'll look at the difference between years to see if that's a variability. And then we can go back and look at our weather.
Marshall's asking in the chats, what was the seeding rates for these barley trials?
That was a variable dependent on the farmer.
And as far as other nutrients like PK, sulfur?
They put down the P and K according to their crop needs. We just adjusted the nitrogen. And the other thing too that's neat is I like it when you guys bring these kind of questions forward because we have all of this data. We have the disease ratings, we have our seeding rates, we have the fertility that went down. So if anything kind of comes to mind, you think, I wonder what, did that affect anything? We can look at it, we have the data.
Misty, are you looking at similar kind of work on spring wheat that you're doing on barley?
No, we haven't done anything on spring wheat. We're doing stuff on winter wheat. Currently, the winter wheat trial is a seeding timing, not a fertility trial at this point, though. And actually, that kind of brings us to our next trial.
You want to go ahead, Missy?
Sure. So yeah, that kind of is a good segue into the other trials that AGC is working on. We've got the Coron, Sulfur, and Boron trial. It's got 3 treatments: the control with no boron or sulfur, then we add boron, and then we add boron and sulfur to see if there's an impact on yield. For the soybean fungicide trial, this trial actually is a fairly old trial. I think it's been going on since 2015. And we have the control with no fungicide, then we add fungicide at R1 or first flower, then we add fungicide again at R2 or full flower, and then we have a double application. So we've done it at both R1 and R2. So we have an early, a late, and a combined to see if there's any difference there. The soybean nitrogen and sulfur trial, there's 4 treatments in this one. We have a control with no nitrogen or sulfur. Then we add 30 pounds to the acre of sulfur. Then we add 30 pounds of nitrogen with 30 pounds of sulfur. And then we add 60 pounds of nitrogen with 30 pounds of sulfur. See if there's an impact on yield. The winter wheat seeding date trial, we looked at 2 different seeding dates based on growing degree days. And we have 1.7 million seeds early, which would be September 15th to the 25th, I think. And then we have 2 seeding rates late. So we're looking at between October 15th and October 30th, where we plant at 1.7, and then we plant again at a second or a third treatment at 2.1. So the early seeding date is the 1.7, the late is 1.7 and 2.1. And we really want to see if we can make up the difference with that month difference in seeding rate or seeding date with the increase in the seeding rate. So we've got 1 year data on that one so far, but we have trials in the ground on that right now. We have a soybean boron trial where it's a simple boron, no boron to see if we're seeing an impact on yield. The field pea seeding rate trial, we've got 3 different seeding rates that we're looking at for that one. We have a field pea gypsum trial where they're adding gypsum for the sulfur content. Of course, the calcium is also playing a part in that as well. And we have the oats intensive management trial, and that's looking at nitrogen rates, growth regulators, and fungicides. So that one's a very intensive management is a perfect title for it. Any questions on those trials? If you're really curious about them, you can sign up for them, and we'd love to come to your farm and put one there. So what trials are next? You tell us. Is there any cropping questions that you guys have that you need answered? AGC is the perfect place to bring that up because we can put the trial together and see if we can come up with an answer for those questions. If you're looking for more information on the current trials, they will be available online through videos. Like Alan mentioned earlier, you can go to the Atlantic Grain Council and see the videos that they've come up there, and any more information on those are available. So is there anything that comes to your guys' mind that you'd like to see done? Or maybe just more analysis on the trials that we have on the ground?
Misty, once you've done enough sites and years to reach kind of conclusions that are statistically significant, then do you typically terminate those trials and move on, or do you tend to carry them forward?
They usually morph into something else. So like if you think about the barley trial, we had that in place for so many years that we were really confident that that 80 pounds per acre was a good nitrogen rate. And then, so then we took that a step further. So the barley trial that I just showed you is brand new because it's a continuation of that nitrogen trial. So like with the soybean seeding rate, okay, if we're seeing that the crop rotation is telling us that we can customize our seeding rates to maximize our yield, then we might morph that into a new trial, looking at what other things can we manipulate to offset the effect of that rotation, or is there something else that we can draw, that we can put into the trial to draw more conclusions from. So they end, but they usually develop something new. So every time we find an answer, we usually find another question.
There's a couple of comments in the chat about ideas: potassium uptake in post-tassel corn, foliar or granular, spring wheat work. And where do we top out on total amount of N for grain corn? So nitrogen rates in grain corn.
Yeah.
You done
What kind
much?
of heat units are you guys using over there?
We're growing in PEI kind of on the low side, 72-day corn, to the high side, 80 would be high.
Mm-hmm. I think most of us are in that same range. Some people are a bit more cautious. There's a few pockets that we've rolled the dice on a higher heat unit corn, but for the most part, we're all kind of in that same neck of the woods.
Yeah, for grain in particular, it would be low to mid 70s.
Yeah, yeah.
As far as days.
Nitrogen on corn, man, that's a tough one. And I'm sure Marielle, you could probably speak to this too. Like, we're always chasing nitrogen on corn, because I've never met a corn plant yet that's like, oh, sorry, I'm full, I don't need any more.
Misty, we did do a study early on, I think from 2015 to 2017.
Yeah.
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I'll get back to Robert and back to Agrimart with some of those results.
We had one on the fungicide late.
Yeah, but there was a nitrogen study early on.
Maybe that was before me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a never ending question, because you have so many factors in play there, not to mention the yield potential of the corn variety that you're planting.
Mm-hmm.
And then
yeah, genetic impacts of, there's genetic variability between hybrids as well.
Yeah,
as far as what will react and what won't to some extent.
Yeah. But no, it's if we can wrap our heads around creating a trial that would be consistent enough for that, we could. I mean, sky's the limit. You ask the questions, we'll figure out a way to answer them. Okay. So more information online.
Yeah, just a couple more comments about CEC levels. Robert's wondering growth regulators on winter wheat.
We haven't done that one yet.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about that with some new products being available.
Yep.
Timing, rates, product.
The only thing that we've played with growth regulators on so far, Alan, is the oats, right?
Yep.
Was that this year on the oats?
No, it wasn't done in 2020. It was 2019 and 18, I'm pretty sure.
Did it work?
It did.
Good.
Yeah, Doug, the trial was done in northern New Brunswick and focused on trying to put more nitrogen in the crop and get a better crop. And then in order to do that, you needed fungicide to keep the crop healthy and get good color. And then to prevent the lodging, both the fungicide and growth regulator, trying to keep the stand up. And there were really good results coming out of that. We'd like to get, the reason it didn't happen in 2020 was equipment problems. So we definitely intend to run that again next year.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Interesting.
Just a couple of comments across the line of trials that Misty showed. This year in 2020, we cracked 100 trial sites in Atlantic Canada. So we were not necessarily on 100 farms because some farmers ran 2 different trials, but we had, I believe, we put in the ground 104, and I think we're harvesting 100 or 101. So that's a record year for us, and that's where we need to be. And that's what gives us the power and the statistics to be able to tease out all the different information. And we certainly appreciate everybody's ideas coming to the table. We're just starting the process. So all of this work is happening with your checkoff dollars. So the dollar per acre roughly that comes off the sale of grain and oil seeds is going into this program, and then we match that with program funding, and we're able to turn each producer dollar into about $6 or $7 of research funding once we get matched. And our science team is very strong. As you can see, Misty leading this today, but backing up Misty is some of our federal scientists and our federal statistician, as well as the grain and oilseed specialists in each province, and then agrologists from companies like Agrimart. So we try to draw in as many people as we can in this process. So just a brief introduction, and there were some comments coming up on chat about growth regulators and more work in spring wheat. We will be having an event on Thursday where we will be announcing the 2020 field season winners of the Yield Enhancement Network. And for this year, we have expanded it beyond Prince Edward Island. And you can see sites in all 3 of the maritime provinces. And we've also expanded it beyond wheat, and we've now included barley. So for all of these sites where the farmer enters a field into the competition, all of their management information is collected. So we've kind of hung back on experiments in wheat until we got a couple years under our belt in the Yield Enhancement Network. And the results that we're just starting to look at now will help direct our research in the future. So this event is happening on Thursday at 10 a.m. I'm not sure what the next slide is, Misty. Can you just... So these were the winners for the 2019 PEI yen. So this year we will have winners in winter wheat, spring wheat, and barley, and as well as an overall winner. The event is being held virtually on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. There's going to be a good overview of the models, the growth models that are used to calculate everything, as well as going through reports with producers. I think there were over 50 producers involved this year, and it's something we very much want to see grow. And I expect next year you're going to see Atlantic Grains Council push harder in all 3 provinces for participants. And we're also going to try to expand the crops that are involved in this. We have a British partner that invented this system, and we want to eventually see this grow to all the crops that are grown in Atlantic Canada, all field crops that we're involved in. So that's the intent of where that's going, and it's another good piece of information that adds on to the on-farm agronomy. So if anybody is interested and they have not found that they've gotten an invite yet, participants should have all received their reports by now. If you do want an invite, just email Heather at atlanticgrainscouncil.ca, and she'll make sure you get an invite. And it's this Thursday at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, sorry, I made that slide last week.
Yeah.
This Thursday.
So March 4th. So that's my plug for that for the day. And just so that the growers are aware, the Yield Enhancement Network is also run with checkoff dollars.
Colin is wondering what new crops are planned for 2021.
I don't have an answer for that yet. We're open to ideas. I think in the UK they've done some work in soybeans, and they have one in forage, and an interesting one, they have one in nutrient management that we're taking a look at, which goes across all crops. So within the next few weeks, we'll be looking to see what we can launch for 2021.
Oh. Alan, I prefer, see Ryan's comment. Ryan's tired of Zoom. He wanted to go to the bar for his yen prize.
Yes, Ryan, unfortunately it's BYOB this year.
You'll have to have a drink at home, Ryan. Well, I'd like to thank Misty and Alan for your presentation. That's very informative. I guess we'll wrap up with a couple of door prizes. Andrew did the drawing. The winners today are Robert McDonald, Marshall Smallman, and Jerry Richard. So we will be getting those out to you when the COVID restrictions lighten up a little bit and we're allowed to go back out on farms. Hopefully soon. If anyone has any other comments, if not, thanks for joining us. Next week, our talk is from Bayer Crop Science. Graham Tempton and some of his associates will be making a presentation. And the following week, Dan Foster with our head office at agronomy is doing a talk on planter calibrations. So right along the lines of today.
Yeah.
You'll be
Thank
seeing
you so much
those.
for the invitation.
Thanks for the talk, Misty.
Marielle, I'll just add we have recorded this session today, so if anyone wants to kind of view it on their own time afterwards, or if there's anyone else in your operation you think would be interested and would benefit from viewing it, let us know. We can send you a link to view it. And yeah, I just want to just echo what Mariella said. Thanks to Misty and to Alan for presenting the work, and to everyone associated with the Atlantic Grains Council. It's fantastic work that AGC does. It benefits all growers in Atlantic Canada, and I know we're appreciative of the work and appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with Atlantic Grains Council on behalf of PI Agromart. So thank you for presenting and for all the work that you do.
Great. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks very much. Hopefully I'll get to see you this summer.
Yeah, in real life.
In real life.
Sounds like we're out of questions. So thanks everyone. Hope to see everyone joining us again. Same time, same place, a week from today when we have a session with Bayer.